Hey guys, I just want to put a trigger warning first that this case is gruesome. There is a lot of talk of sexual assault and just a really hard case to wrap your mind around what happens to these people. If you're not in a great headspace, don't worry about it. Just go find another video and we'll get back on track soon, okay? Please don't force yourself to watch something that might trigger you or upset you. But thanks guys, let's get into the video. Hey guys, it's ayebeepee and welcome back to my channel. I've got my bachelor's in criminal justice and a minor in psychology, and I'm gonna say that for the next 73 videos because I'm just so proud of myself. On top of that, I'm a board member for a non-profit called Voices for the Silenced, and what we do best is we just help get resources for families and just do the most we can for them in their time of need when their loved one goes missing. And welcome back to my Crimetober series, and more specifically, welcome back to the Rogers family case. If you haven't watched part 1, I would suggest to go do that first because there might be a few things that are a little confusing in this one if not. So let's get right in. So the Rogers family was Hal, which was the dad, and Joe, which was the mom. There was Michelle and there was Christy. They lived in Wilshire, Ohio, on a dairy farm that Hal had inherited from his family. At first, Hal lived on this farm with his brother, and they both raised 80 cows, with of course the help of Joe and the girls. Now Joe also worked at Peyton's Northern for some extra money and health insurance for the family, and it was just running her ragged. And then in the midst of all this, they had found out that John Rogers, Hal's brother, had been and recording Hal's daughter Michelle. And this was a small town, so everybody knew about it, everybody was talking about it, and they really needed to get away. So they had planned this huge Florida vacation. It centered mostly around Disney World, but they did go to a few different places, and they took their time going down and coming back up. But Hal did have to stay at the farm because at this point, the 5 people that usually ran the farm, so Joe and the girls were on vacation, and then John was in prison, so that just left Hal. So there was no way Hal could go on this vacation at all. So Joe and the girls go on this vacation and honestly have the time of their lives. And on their way back though, something happened. And they're still trying to piece it together in part 2, but it seemed that Joe got lost and took a wrong exit, so the girls decided to stay for another night. Now this case was in 1989, so it wasn't like Joe could have texted Hal and told him they were staying another night. So it's not thought that she had gotten a hold of Hal at all to let him know that. They had got offered to go on a sunset boat ride, so they did end up checking into their hotel room. They went there, their belongings were in there, but it's thought that they never slept there. They were seen at the restaurant downstairs before the sunset boat ride, and they seemed very happy. So this whole thing has been super confusing on who could have even done anything to them, because just 3 days later, their bodies would be found in the Tampa Bay. There was duct tape over their mouths, their wrists and ankles were duct taped, and there was a rope around their necks that tied a cinder block to them to make them sink. Now this was in June in Tampa, so it was really hot, the water was hot already, and this caused the bodies to decompose at an accelerated rate, which bloated them and made them actually float, even with 30-pound cement blocks tied to them. It is thought that they were because all of them had from the waist down their clothes removed, and on top of that there was water in their lungs, which means they were thrown in alive. Their car was found at the boat dock with 2 things in it that had handwriting on them. A brochure that had directions to the Days Inn they were staying in, and that one had 2 different handwritings on it. One did test as a match for Joe, but the other one was not the girl's, so it was someone somewhere. And then the other one was the Days Inn stationery, and it had directions to the boat dock. So it was clear someone knew they had gotten to the Days Inn. And this handwriting did test as a match for Joe, but they really didn't have anything to go on. That was pretty much as far as they could get it for quite a while. So let's get into the investigation. The police did end up going to the hotel and getting all the guests' car and just regular information to start seeing if any of these people were who killed them. But everyone was cleared. So then they started looking into the cinder blocks and the cement that was used and whether they were all the same and maybe bought at a certain place or gotten from a certain place, and that led nowhere too. Each cinder block was different, so it wasn't like they could even trace it back to a certain place that someone got it. In the hotel room, the police had found a disposable camera, so they did get this film developed, and it was really sweet, honestly, because you could tell from the pictures their whole trip. They had taken so many pictures, and you could tell that they had even taken pictures in the hotel room before they left. They had taken a picture on the balcony of the hotel of the sunset, so they knew they were at least in their room at the sunset time of that day. So when the police found out that these girls were, the first thing they thought of was John Rogers. Now, he was in prison at this time, so there's no way he actually did it, and they did look into whether he might have hired somebody from the inside or even convinced somebody to do anything, but it just never panned out. That was a stretch, and it was proven he didn't really do that. And naturally, you do have to look into the spouse when something like this happens, so they did investigate how. They did think it was weird. He was so reserved and just didn't show very much emotion, but that was just truly Hal. He was a quiet, shy, reserved dude. They did question why he would post bail for his brother, and Hal said this was before he realized what he did to Michelle. He just thought he had an issue with his ex-girlfriend, but never in a million years did he assume they would find those cassette tapes and pictures of Michelle and what he did to her. So he did end up telling him to never return to the farm or see him, talk to him, anything. And from what I understand, they have had no contact. Now, Hal had withdrew $7,000 from the bank right after all this happened, and the police thought that was really sketchy. When they asked Hal about it, he explained that he doesn't believe in credit cards. He honestly never had a credit card, and neither did Joe. Now, this was in 1989, so it was common for people not to have credit cards. But what was this money for? He knew searching for his girls was going to be a lot of money, and he knew he was going to have to travel to Florida with it. He just wanted to be as prepared as possible to be able to just hand over cash right away when he got there, because he knew time was precious. Now, granted, he got so busy with the farm, we talked about that in the first part, that he had to do that for himself. He kind of had to escape into the farm because his mind was going crazy about where his girls were. So he really did end up losing track of time just from grieving, worrying, and throwing himself into the farm. So he actually did still have the cash, and he told the cops, "Go in my trunk, it's right there, and you can see that I haven't spent a dime of it. It's just in an envelope in my truck." And they did. They went there, they counted it out, and every penny was there. Hal was extremely cooperative. Did this probably aggravate him being questioned and, looked into? Of course. I feel like any spouse, especially if they didn't do it, would be kind of like, are you serious? Like, let's get on with who it actually could be. But this is a good precaution, and Hal understood that. And so he did. He cooperated the best best he could. And the fact of the matter is that Hal did not cook for himself. So when the girls were out in Florida, Hal had to eat out pretty much every meal. So there were tons of wait staff that said they saw Hal during this time, and that was the ultimate thing that cleared him. So then they started looking into the handwriting that they could not identify. Like I was saying earlier, the Clearwater Beach brochure had Joe's handwriting that had directions to the Days Inn, and the Days Inn stationery was the one that had the directions to the boat ramp, and it had also said blue and white, but I'll put on the screen how it was written. And people assumed that this was the colors of the boat that the girls needed to look for. The police didn't anticipate was how common blue and white was for boats. Now, what threw people was that a woman claimed they saw this car at the boat dock at 2 p.m. and they said they saw them with someone that could have been a suspect. He was 5'10", like a medium build, 33 to 40, with light hair and a mustache. And the boat they saw these girls get on was an older boat. It was a faded blue. It had a blue canopy that was put down, a single engine that was kind of lifted up, white, completely open interior of the boat, and there were 2 places to sit on the back and 2 places to sit on the stern. And there was some spongy cover that they put on the boat steering wheel, and it had kind of like a storage area up front. And kind of remember that, we'll circle back to that in a little bit. Now, there were tons of people turning in boats that were blue and white, and none of those tips led anywhere. But part of the investigation realized that the girls' eyes were never covered. They weren't blindfolded or anything like that, which means whoever this person was dangerous, because they wanted the girls to watch what happened to each other. This is when they got really smart. Someone on the team said, we are going to put billboards up with this extra person's handwriting that we have no idea of. They were pretty much out of options, and they really thought this was a long shot, but they threw it up on a billboard and asked, does anybody recognize this handwriting? It is linked to the Rogers family murder. And here's the crazy thing. Now, this person recognized this handwriting and provided a handwriting sample that they had of their neighbor. It was a receipt for aluminum work that was done around their house, and she told them that this man's name was Oba Chandler. And this is when things started rolling. Now, I want to go into a woman named Judy Blair. She was a 24-year-old Canadian that just wanted to take a vacation to Florida. She went to Madeira Beach with her friend Barbara, and on May 14th, 1989, 2 weeks before anything happened to the girls, a man introduced himself as David Posner at a 7-Eleven in Tampa. He said he lived about 2 hours away from Madeira Beach and said that he owned an aluminum siding business. And so on May 15th, Dave had invited them on a sunset boat ride. Now, Barbara didn't really want to go, but Judy did. She thought that sounded kind of cool. And his boat was white and blue. Now, the boat ride was nice. It was beautiful, and Judy took several pictures, and communication came really easy to them. They really was able to flow in conversation. Wait, did I say the first one was a sunset boat ride? Scratch that. That was a regular boat ride. So once this one went great, he asked her to go on a sunset boat ride. And so then she took more pictures on this boat ride and even got some of him in them. Now, she did notice he was taking her fairly far out into the bay, and once the sun had completely set, he started acting really different. I want to put a huge trigger warning here for, so if you need to, please skip ahead. I'll put a timestamp here for what time to go to. Now, he got rather aggressive and was asking for sex. He started trying to touch her inappropriately, and she kept saying no, and she tried to like scream and cry, and he said that if she didn't shut up, he would duct tape it. So then he pinned her down and ripped off her top and pulled down her shorts and bikini bottoms. She was begging him not to do this because she was a virgin. She wanted to wait till marriage, and she knew that this wasn't the way she wanted her first time. But that got him even more into it. And he ended up telling her that if she wanted to live, he was going to have sex with her. And then her. He gave her a thermos full of water and told her to wash herself off. Told her to get dressed. He threw her camera overboard because she had gotten pictures of him, and then just tried to have casual conversation with her again. And Judy was just too shocked to even speak, let alone try to have a conversation with someone who just raped her. They were headed back to the shore when he threw up over the side of the boat, and he got close enough to where he could see the shore and told her to jump and swim to shore. That's how you'll survive. And she actually was able to get back to the hotel with Barbara safe and sound, but she felt disgusting. She took a shower immediately. Now, she did end up going to the police station afterwards, and they did tell her the shower probably didn't do that much because he had her wash herself off with water there, then he made her swim, and that would have gotten rid of almost all DNA anyways. But she did help with a composite sketch to try to catch this person that did this to her. She said he was mid-30s, white, about 5'10", 180 pounds, sandy blonde hair, and wearing a hat. When Oba was mentioned for the billboards, they thought, why not go and talk to Judy again? And so they flew all the way up to Canada and talked to Judy Blair. She told them her story again, and honestly, it sounded a lot like the Rogers. The only thing that threw them off was there was 2 boat rides, but what if there were 2 boat rides for the Rogers? And that's why that woman saw them there at 2 p.m. But there was proof they went back to the hotel room until at least 7. Now, they flew Judy to Florida to do a photo lineup, and one of them was Oba, and she picked him out almost immediately. And then they did an actual lineup. She got him too. So they looked at Oba and said, we would like to search your boat, but he sold it. Now, who's this Oba Chandler? Oba was born in Cincinnati, Ohio in 1946. But now he lived a mile from the boat dock. His parents were Oba Chandler Sr. and Margaret Johnson. He was the 4th of 5 kids, and he himself had 13 children by 12 different women. Now, Oba's father had committed suicide when Oba was 10, and this devastated Oba. And at the funeral, Margaret didn't even come, and Oba evidently jumped on his father's casket while it was being lowered into the ground. He was devastated, and his mom wasn't even there to help him. Now, Oba was a less than stellar student. He was always in trouble, and truancy was an issue to the point that it made him fail 4th grade. He was an unlicensed aluminum siding contractor, and when you looked up customer reviews, it was that he seemed shady, he refused to make eye contact, and was just a weird guy. Now, when he was 14, he started stealing cars, and he would end up being arrested 20 times for this, all as a minor. He also had breaking and entering on his record and charges for fighting. And as an adult, he was arrested for possession of counterfeit money, loitering, money laundering, burglary, kidnapping, sexual assault, and armed robbery. He was also accused of masturbating while he looked through a woman's window. And between May to September 1991, he was thought to be an informant for the U.S. Customs Bureau in Tampa during this whole investigation for the Rogers. It is thought that he most likely used that he was also born in Ohio to gain the trust of these girls, especially once he noticed their Ohio license plate. It's thought that they boarded his boat between 8:30 to 9 p.m. and there was records for 3 offshore calls, which are from like a boat to the landlines, between 1 to 5 a.m. He was calling his wife to let her know that he was going to be late and that he was having boat trouble. The palm print on the brochure proved to be Oba Chandler's, and it was eerily weird that they had sold the boat and left town right after all this happened. It was thought that his wife had no idea what was going on. He had kept the secret all to himself. She was devastated when she found out. And they ended up arresting him on September 24th, 1992. He ended up getting all the way to Georgia, but ultimately came home, which is when they got him. He didn't even resist getting arrested, but he did ask what it was for, and the trial was in the summer of 1994. The state's official statement was that Joe had pulled off on the side of the road when she got off the interstate taking a wrong turn. She stopped to get her bearings, to get the map out, and try to figure out where she was. This is when they think that Oba saw the Ohio license plate and went and talked to her. He then gave her directions to the Days Inn, which convinced her to stay one more night. Since he then knew that they were staying overnight, he would call and give her directions to the boat dock, which they would end up going. They would get on his boat and he would take them way far out into the water like he did Judy, tell them they needed to be quiet, or he would duct tape their mouths, them, and threw them over one by one, the others having to watch everything that's happening to the other. It is thought that Joe was first to be thrown off because her body was so much farther away from the girls, and it's thought that he would have wanted to have, and I can't believe they use those words, but he wanted to have more fun with Michelle and Christy. Now, they had a former employee of Oba's that came in and testified, saying that the night of the murder, he was bragging about dating 3 women. Said he showed up to work the next day on his boat and got some things and left shortly after. And then Oba's daughter testified, and she claimed that her dad came to her house after all of this and told her he had killed 3 women. He also admitted to a woman and was scared to leave because he knew people were looking for him. And then good old Judy Blair, who honestly really tied this story together. She testified for her whole encounter with Oba Chandler, and it was scary how similar it was to the evidence found in the Rogers case. And they really used her to show a pattern of behavior with him. And she did say she thought she was left alive because Barbara would have been able to identify Oba Chandler because she had met him, and she can say, I had a weird feeling, so I didn't go. But it was thought that if Barbara would have came, their fate would have been just like the Roger girls. Now, Chandler decided to testify, and he did mention walking up to them and giving them directions. And he said that he never saw them again until they were in the news and on the billboards. So when he was asked about what he was doing in the Tampa Bay at night, he claimed he was fishing, and then his engine started having trouble. He thought there was a gas line leak, and he said that he called the Coast Guard and the Florida Marine Patrol, and they were too busy. Said he tried to flag down a patrol boat, but said he fixed the gas line leak with duct tape and was able to make it home. Now, there was actually no distressed phone calls that came to the Coast Guard or the Florida Marine Patrol that night. And there was no Coast Guard really even in that area that night. So he couldn't have been trying to flag down one of their boats. And so they took his engine and gave it to a boat mechanic, and he said that what he's saying was not anything close to what could have been happening. First of all, you can't fix a gas line with duct tape because it completely corrodes the adhesive. In the way this gas line was set up, it would have been spraying gas up in the air. It would not be drowning it into just the water. So he was sentenced to death on September 29, 1994, and he entered death row at the Union Correctional Institution. The judge was completely disgusted by Oba Chandler and told him he was a man with no soul. His whole family abandoned him. His wife divorced him, and she had that marriage dissolved within the first year he was in prison. He was no longer allowed to see his daughter, and his wife made it to where he couldn't even have pictures of her after knowing what he did to Michelle and Christy. And while he was on death row, he received 0 visitors. He did continue to fight for his innocence, but no one really ever believed him, and all his appeals were denied. He did end up admitting he had sex with Judy Blair and said it was consensual, but she changed her mind halfway through. Since he was already sentenced to death for the Rogers girls, they did not see a reason to put Judy through a trial like this. And on October 10th, 2011, Governor Rick Scott signed Oba Chandler's death warrant. His last meal was 2 salami sandwiches on white bread with mustard, a peanut butter and grape jelly sandwich on white bread that he only ate about half of, iced tea, but he ended up drinking coffee instead. And on November 17th, 2011, at 4 p.m., the execution was scheduled, and Oba Chandler was dead by 4:08. His last written statement was, "You are killing an innocent man today," and his last words were, "Kiss my rosy red ass." Now, there was another case that he ended up being the suspect in. Now, I can't say this poor girl's name, so I'm going to put it on the screen and do the best I can. She was a 20-year-old newlywed and worked at the Sawgrass Mills Mall, and that was where she was last seen, at the sporting goods store she worked at. When she didn't come home, her husband went to the mall and looked for her, and she was nowhere to be seen. Her car was still there, but her tires were completely slashed. And about 3 hours later, she was reported missing. She was found by 2 men coming home from fishing under a mailbox in a neighborhood. She was completely naked and had ligature marks on her wrists and legs, and she had brown tape stuck in her hair. But on February 25th, 2014, DNA evidence identified Oba Chandler as her killer. It's thought that he watched her for 2 days. He slashed her tires and tried to show up as a helpful stranger. And this is the case that made DNA be shared with tons of unsolved cases in Florida, because you just never know. There was no reason to even be looking into Oba Chandler for this person, and he was the killer. Now, Hal still puts his heart and soul into farming. He did switch from cows to pigs, and he still really used his work on the farm as his coping mechanism. He did end up finding a new wife, Jolene. She was also a widow, so she somewhat understood at least the grief he went through, at least of losing a partner. But thank you guys so much for watching. Like and subscribe for me, and hit that notification button. That way you're notified the next time I upload. I do have a GoFundMe for Crystal Young going, so if you haven't, please go watch that video and figure out why her mom needs her PI so bad. And don't forget, I also have stickers for sale. They're $2 each, and all proceeds go to the Cold Case Foundation. So it is for a good cause. And just thank you guys again so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!